Baloney has a first name. It's OSCAR. Hi, everyone.
How's it going?
I really caught Evelyn off guard here.
I didn't realize we were recording.
I've been kind of like slowly meandering through everything, and then all of a sudden I got a burst of energy in which I started recording immediately. So what's up, Evelyn?
Not much. I've been watching a lot of DC movies this week.
I forced Evelyn.
That's been an experience.
Yes, I can't wait to talk about your new life as a non-virgin. Am I right? But yeah, so today we're talking. Sorry, I'm going to scoot my mic closer because I feel like I'm sitting really far away from it. Today we're going to be talking about...
We're talking about The Dark Knight Rises.
We're talking about The Dark Knight Rises.
I wonder how that's going to sound on the actual podcast.
Oh, I wondered what would break first, your spirit or your body, Poosh. So we're talking about The Dark Knight Rises today, and I just need to get this out of the way. Little Erynn freaking loved The Dark Knight Rises. Like, there's evidence. Like, my favorite throwback picture of myself is me cheesing it up with a Bane t-shirt on from The Dark Knight Rises. And so, yeah, I love that shit.
I expect one of us in the wreckage, brother.
Oh my god. And I still really like The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, it was an enjoyable movie.
I really love Bane. I'm a part of that group.
I was very shook by that voice. Like, he
yeah,
as
I get a text from Evelyn at like 1
Like,
a.m. and it says something like, okay, I knew the voice was like that, but I didn't know the voice was like that.
The first, like, that whole airplane scene, because, like, that voice combined with the fact you can't see his mouth made me think I was watching like an abridged dub or something where they're just doing like the most ridiculous voice on purpose.
Yeah, it's like, it was so good.
But other than that, I was surprised how much, like, overall, because like I really liked Batman Begins, and my impression of the Nolan trilogy after that, as someone who had only seen bits and pieces, was like that they were these kind of grim, dark things that missed the point of, like, the comic book characters. But it seemed like they got, they understood the ethos of everything, even if they carried it out differently, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, it's like the Godfather movies, where, like, everyone hates the final one, but I think it's okay.
The
and
Dark
it does
Knight
a good
trilogy
job
is just like the Godfather.
That's not what I said. That is not. I didn't say that. Evelyn, slander lies.
It's out on the internet now. It doesn't matter.
Can sue. But I think it wraps it up pretty well in the context of the full trilogy. Whether or not it's a great, perfect movie on its own, that's a whole other question. But in the context of the trilogy, I think it does a really good job. I really like the come around with Talia al Ghul. She's actually, okay, this is funny. I can finally tell you this, Evelyn.
Oh,
she's actually still one of my high-key fashion icons.
Nice.
I love how she wears scarves.
Yeah. I see that.
Obsessed. She's so good, except for her death, but, like, that wasn't her fault.
Yeah, she was, like, of all the characters in the movie, I felt like she was kind of the most underplayed, because I kind of forgot about her at certain parts, like... Yeah,
that's a fair point. I almost wish they had done, like, a super cool, like, hierarchy of knowledge thing where, like, we knew more than, like, the protagonist, because that might have been an interesting play on her character.
Yeah.
Because
because Talia al Ghul has a lot of comic history too to be built on.
To be built on. Some men want to wash the world. Welcome to DC Month with Gentlemen for Cinephiles. We're just doing horrendous accents and quoting the movies. Yeah. That's it. It's just an hour of us, like... Some men want to watch the world burn.
Have I plugged Holy Musical Batman on the podcast yet? Because I keep making references to it. Where, like, if you have not seen Holy Musical Batman, it's on YouTube. But, like, the Alfred character just does a Michael Caine impression, but he keeps, like, Bruce keeps firing him, and he keeps coming back in disguise. And he's like, "It's me, your Irish O'Malley."
It's me, O'Malley. What's happening there? Yeah, I can't even describe it. I just really like it. I also, I like Bane. I really like. I think he does a really good job at execution. Honestly, in terms of villainhood, I think he's one of the most successful villains we've seen thus far.
The voice. I can't.
How dare you? Are you laughing at his voice again?
We're coming to free you.
Back in the day, somebody described it as I don't remember what YouTuber described it as this, but it's like Sean Connery talking through Optimus Prime's voice box, and I think that's a perfect description.
Yeah.
Which is, you know what the crazy thing is? When the first trailer dropped, they had to go re-record all of Bane's lines because it was too much. Let's listen. Oh my God, Evelyn, talk about some theoretical basis while I find the original Bane voice.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I guess that's the big thing that polarizes people is how much they altered Bane's character. Because to go into some backstory, if you're familiar with the character Doc Savage, he was this pulp hero who his whole deal was he was almost like bred on an island to be a hero. Like he was trained to like the peak of perfection, and he like was taught
but
by
he
the
is still a
smartest men.
gentle lover.
We'll get to that. He was taught by all these brilliant minds, and so like that's Doc Savage's character, and the concept of Bane was like, what if we did Doc Savage as a Batman villain, basically? So Bane has this story that's kind of the inverse, where he was trained by all these brilliant minds, but they were criminals, and he grew up in this prison instead of on an island, basically trained to be like the perfect criminal that could match Batman. And also he like different adaptations have emphasized it more, but Bane is like his background was him being like South American somewhere, and so like casting
as a
Latinx
Latinx woman, 2 men can play brown people. Tom Hardy can play Bane, and Nathan Lane can play Gomez Adams.
I thought you were going to say Sean Connery could play a Japanese man.
Oh, I'm a brown woman. I'm not allowed to make that judgment call. As a woman who speaks for all brown people, I'm just kidding. That is a joke. Yeah. That is a joke for everybody.
But yeah, like so that element of Bane's character was. Well, it was weird how they did that, because they build it up to sort of make you think Bane was that person who grew up in this jail, but then they flip it around and they're like, actually it was Talia, and Bane was just a guy who like looked out for her. And
I kind of like that though, the romantic in me.
Like, I think as a story it works, but I think a lot of the like people's judgment of this movie is, and it kind of comes back to an interesting discussion for comic book movies, is if it does there are movies that do a story well on their own, but they do so by departing drastically from the stuff upon which they're based.
Yeah.
And I think there's a discussion to be had about whether, like, what that, like, the basis, how important the basis of stuff is. Because I think it's definitely important to respect and understand the stuff you're coming from, which I think we'll get into in the next couple of episodes. But there is... It's kind of a balancing act, I think, because films need to sort of reimagine certain things just by the nature of the fact that they're doing it in a film and not a comic.
Yeah, and if I'm actually like looking at it as a casual viewer of like, you know, comic book movies and like the gritty realism and blah 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 blah, I think Batman. I almost said Batman vs Superman. That's not what I fucking meant. I think The Dark Knight Rises actually does an excellent job at hitting this nice middle point between a comic book movie feel and a super gritty new age like superhero movie. Like it really feels like it's in both worlds, and that's something I really appreciate about the movie, especially when you look at like other characters like Selena Kyle, Catwoman. I really like Anne Hathaway's Catwoman, but then again, who am I? Because I loved Halle Berry's Catwoman back in the day.
I think Anne Hathaway's Catwoman was actually like I'm not the biggest like follower of Catwoman, but I've always liked the character, and I think she, like I said with the movie, like they captured the.
In response to that, I almost went Rear! I don't know why. Anyway,
it's gonna be a long week.
It's a lot. These DC ones are a lot.
Yeah, but I think like a lot of things in this movie, they changed the details, but they kept the ethos behind those details. And I think Selena Kyle's arc fit very much with what makes her a compelling character in the stuff this was based on, but made it fit in the Nolan world, where she is this very, she's someone who has good in her, but is also a very self-serving person, but also kind of looks out for other people below her because she knows what it's like to be a struggling person, and like there's a lot to her, which like especially having that kind of depth to a side female character in a movie like this it's something you see a lot of people take an easy rap out on, I guess, a lot of times. So
yeah,
that depth
100%.
Was really cool.
Yeah,
Also,
I really like that.
Also, remembering, like, I want to say this was kind of a reinvention time for Anne Hathaway.
It was.
Like,
it was definitely a huge rebrand.
Because at the time, like, my mom was really into, like, Princess Diaries, Ella Enchanted.
Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah, I think Devil Wears Prada had come out, but she was, like, that kind of, like, funny rom-com person, so, like, going into a action heavy role, and like she kicks a lot of people in this movie too.
I really love that scene. I just I'm shameless about it. I fucking love this movie. I should be honest about it, but it's so like yeah. But fuck, what is it? What?
Oh,
I'm looking up an actor's name, but I really love that scene with Catwoman. The guy who's like always cast as like token bad dude.
Yeah.
Like he's literally the villain in Ready Player One.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
Yeah, we'll have to look that up. But well, actually, let me just look up Ready Player One. I love that scene though where they're fighting or whatever, and he's like, "Can we get some girls in here?" And then she like just comes out of nowhere, and they're standing super close, and her foot just like is like. Whoop, like right by his head.
It's like that part in like what was it, Zohan, where he just
totally like, oh my god, yeah. And then she's like she says some quippy like 80s detective line, and he's like, "You're dumb," and then she says something else.
Yeah, she's like, "You think I'm dumb because of this?" And he's like, "You're
dumb." And then she says, "Nobody's ever called me dumb before." And then he goes, "You're dumb."
Yeah,
and I'm just like, just little things like that. I fucking love that. Oh my god.
But I think that's interesting looking back on these movies in general. Is they are a lot more comic booky than I and a lot of people remember them as.
Yeah, 100%. Because I know I remembered them as super gritty, but when I look at them compared to where DC is now,
yeah. Also, I think Dark Knight Rises might be...
It's Ben Mendelsohn. Ben Mendelsohn, we love you. We love your character acting.
Especially in Ready Player One.
I walked out on Ready Player One. We're not even going to go there right now.
No, you see, because he understands that video games are meant to be enjoyed by the people.
Anyway, let's listen to Bane's voice before and after. So yeah, okay, I guess the problem was that when audiences, they either test screened or a trailer released, and they couldn't understand his voice. It's not that they thought that, I don't know, let's listen.
Yeah, let's...
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Perhaps he's wondering why someone would shoot a man before...
So this is this is the before. This is the after.
Or perhaps he's wondering why someone would shoot.
That makes a lot of sense. Honestly,
it's a lot more like distorted.
I mean, I love their realism with the like, well, he has his mouth covered. You don't really hear; it's muffled.
Also, yeah, that was a whole thing. Like, honestly, I don't think he would really count as Bane if he didn't have like a mask, even though his mask is completely different in nature from like Bane's mask.
It's pretty thick. I mean, cool.
Joel Schumacher has the most comic accurate cinema Bane so far.
How dare you? I also really love talking like some of the more comic booky elements of it. Oh yeah, I mean I do really like at the very end with Gary Oldman. Like I know some people like criticized it, but I really liked it in like a whole like comic booky sense, or at least what I perceive comic booky to be like. When he's like, you know, when you sorry. This episode is a mess.
Oh, this is great.
He's like, you know, when you take a child into your office and you're really nice to him, or something like that to Commissioner
Gordon. Put a coat across his shoulders.
And then he's like, Bruce Wayne. I really love that.
Yeah, but I think they knew how to toe that, like, in retrospect, I think they towed that line, like, where there are some things that are really cheesy and comic booky like that, but they work, because that's part of the ethos, and, like, especially, like, the ending with Bruce Wayne doing the whole Iron Giant thing where he's going to carry the bomb away.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, that was also very cheesy, but I think it worked because of, like, they built a world that was gritty enough that you could buy stuff and take stuff seriously, but not so gritty that things like that couldn't happen.
Yeah, and I also like Bruce Wayne's arc throughout all of them. Like, I feel like he really ebbs and flows with, like, you know, I like the peaks and valleys of his arc, because a lot of times with arcs, you get, like, a really strong, like, I guess, like, straight through, like, oh, he starts here and then he ends up here. But it really feels like there's a lot Bruce Wayne goes through in terms of it. Like, he starts the movie like a crippled, like, oh my god, also, like, he spends most of the movie crippled, honestly, like, in the pit.
Yeah, well, it was weird because they start the movie with him crippled and getting back up to fighting shape, and then he gets broken, and then he's crippled and has to get back up to fighting shape again.
I remember it freaked me out as a kid when he's like, your spine is out of your back. And he like, punches it in, and I was like, ah! Freaked me out.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, going back to cheesy moments, like, there was that part where he's, like, climbing out of the pit and everybody's chanting. He's like, it means rise.
I know the chant and I'm not going to do it. I had to physically hold myself back.
I love that.
Oh my god. Yeah, it means rise.
But, like, I was getting so hype. I'm sitting there in my living room trying not to cry.
You're like, oh my god, he did it. He's going to save Gotham. I also, isn't there, like, throwback to other villains? I fucking love Cillian Murphy's throwback.
I like they have him in there, and I'm like, what? Okay.
You were like, doo-doo-doo-doo. I like his, like, guilty or innocent. Or, like, what does he say? It's like
death or exile.
Yes! And then they just send him out on the ice.
He's like, okay, exile. Or death by exile.
I fucking love that kangaroo court suit. It's so good. Yeah, I really like it. I just think it's such an excellent... Oh my god, it's so good!
Yeah, also, I can't remember what... I want to say I've done it, like, 3 times now, but the whole, like... Anarchy in Gotham was a comics event that I felt like they might have done better service to in this movie than the actual comic that, like, originated that concept.
Yeah.
That, like, they've done it in a couple Batman
like
games
Arkham
now,
Asylum and stuff, but this was, like, I think, was this right before or right after?
I think it was in the middle, because, like, I think a couple of them had come out by the 3rd movie, but then the 3rd game had, like, a Dark Knight costume in it, so like, I think that puts it in the middle.
Oh my god, one of my biggest video game brags is I got all the Riddler trophies in one of them. I was like, yeah. But
that's a time sink.
Yeah, it totally was. But I also, okay, how do we feel? So I was very confused as a child because I didn't understand how franchises worked, and I didn't understand like DC's whole rebrand thing, because it's around this time that Avengers is becoming a huge thing, right? Yeah. And they're not. I mean, the Christopher Nolan Batman series is not something like Iron Man in which they could have just extended it and made it into like a DC cinematic universe like they tried. So that's a huge like historical thing we can talk about, because like it was always really confusing to me because they set up what the trilogy for. It really feels like they set it up with Joseph Gordon-Levitt coming on to be the next Batman.
Yeah, or something.
Or like something like that. I don't know. How did you feel about that?
You should use my birth name. It's Robin.
Oh my fucking god!
That was still a little rough for me. Like, I knew it was coming, but like, other than that, but and like timing wise, that's interesting to talk about, because I remember, because Marvel like did that from the ground up. From Iron Man 1, they were like, we're going to bring in the Avengers, and like had that extended road plan. And DC didn't have that extended plan, so I think we were all kind of unsure where they were going to go. Because I remember at least a little bit of talk where people were like, oh, well, maybe they'll just bring Batman back and have Christian Bale cross over with... I think Man of Steel had come out.
Yeah.
And there were like people thinking Christian Bale was gonna like
just be Batman.
Yeah, but like yeah. So it wasn't like a sure thing, but there were a lot of options because DC didn't have that clearly stated roadmap that Marvel did at the time.
Yeah, and so like it was always confusing to me secondhand as a casual viewer because like I was expecting it to continue with that Batman, but then they had to like the origin story in it in Batman versus Superman, which we're going to talk about in the next episode. But yeah, this one was really interesting because on one hand, I think half the creative team knew it wasn't going to continue, so they're trying to wrap it up. And then the other half of the creative team, it felt like they were setting it up for more. And so there's kind of a weird dissonance when you watch the movie now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that makes the movie bad or good, but like...
It's that Hollywood thing where they're like, we're bringing this to a closure unless we think we could make more by not closing it. So we're just going to leave our foot in the door. Like, I think it was that kind of mentality. But also it's interesting, like, how there are still a lot of people who, like, want to see Christian Bale come back as Batman. Because we had... another interesting thing in this conversation is the DC TV series that started out around this time. Because I think if you watch Arrow from, like, season 1 through season 4, when it starts getting really bad...
Ouch!
Like, there is you can see the way that, like, the idea of what a superhero media, like, entails shifting, like, as that show was on. Because as it starts, they're doing the very gritty, like Dark Knight kind of, like, realism thing where there's people with comic book names, but they all have sort of realistic bases for their abilities and their plans and everything. And then you get to season 3 and all of a sudden there's crossovers and the Flash is there and superpowers and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it kind of, like, it reminds me of the very transitional time that this was as far as, like, how superhero movies were viewed.
Yeah, and that might honestly be another really interesting topic for the future is, like, the whole, like... the whole, like, fuckery of, like, Marvel when they're, like... Because I was very overwhelmed with the idea that not only did you have to watch and follow all the Marvel movies in order to get it, which you do. I missed 2 Captain America movies. I came back for the next Avengers one. I was so fucking lost.
I think,
But... not only that, you have to watch TV shows also, like, built into that cinematic universe timeline. And so that's a different conversation for another day. But, yeah, because it was interesting because the Avengers, it wasn't necessarily, like, a crazy established, like... I mean, Marvel did an excellent job at setting up a cinematic universe.
Yeah.
They did it in a very accessible, non-overwhelming way. And they set a good foundation for it. And that was seen through, you know, Iron Man, Thor... moving into the Avengers. And then DC, it felt like DC around the time Dark Knight Rises happened, it felt like a lot was, you know, riding on the Dark Knight Rises too, in that, like, if it did really well, which it, you know, I guess conceptually and critically it didn't do as well as I think maybe they hoped. I wonder if they would have went a different direction if they did do super well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wonder if they would have, like, continued to build their cinematic universe off of the Batman they established, or if they just kind of kept doing, like, trilogies of films. Like, I don't know.
Because I almost feel like DC's mindset at the time was they felt like the cinematic universe thing was a trend that wasn't going to, like, catch on outside of Avengers. And then when it did, that was when they started buckling down on the we're going to introduce everything in one movie to try and catch up mindset. So I think if Dark Knight Rises would have done better than commercially, that they might have, like, just foregone the whole extended universe thing entirely and just kept doing, like you said, like, trilogies or something.
Yeah. So I wonder if, like, it, somewhere in the timeline, the universe timeline, the reality timeline, if they would have done a different approach and that would have been more effective for DC, because there is the question, is cinematic universe something DC should have done? But
yeah. Also, that reminded me of a whole deal where I can't remember what exactly, because with with DC, their television universe and their film universe have been distinct things. Like there have been like they exist as separate continuities. But in their most recent like TV event, they brought in like they were traveling to other dimensions, so they started crossing over with all these film characters. Like I want to say they brought like Val Kilmer back to be a version of Batman, or maybe it was like one of the old Batman actors back. They brought like Burt Ward back as like a Robin character. They brought they had Ezra Miller show up as his Flash to meet the TV Flash for a minute, and I don't think they ended up getting Christian Bale involved in any capacity, but that was another one where people were really like clamoring to see a return to this universe to tie it into everything else. So it's interesting that even now there's still that like almost desire people have to revisit this world versus like the one we've set up now. So how about that Robert Pattinson Batman thing?
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later on down the line. Final episode of the month, future of DC.
Yeah.
I just want him to do the... Everyone, he was getting pissed off during the Lighthouse because he's trying to do the rounds for Lighthouse, right?
Yeah.
And everybody just wants to talk to him about Batman. And he finally, at one interview, was like, well, I've decided to just do Willem Dafoe's pirate voice as Batman. Yeah. And I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Batman coming down in his cave. Why'd you spill your beans? But what?
That's also the thing. Like, again, I'm someone who loves comic books and comic book movies and comic book characters, like, very passionately. But, like, something about the, like, I don't know, oversaturation of it has, like, I don't know, had this weird negative impact where, like, there was, I can't remember, there was I think it was Junji Ito, who's, like, this legendary manga author who's, like, written all these horror manga and stuff, and the journalist was like, would you ever think about writing something about Thanos? And, like, it's just, there's this weird, like I think comic book stories are important, but like the oversaturation has turned them into like this very trivial thing that causes people to lose track of anything else, and it's weird.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting too, the storytelling of it, because like I don't know, it's really interesting because I never got into the TV shows at all. But there is a conversation to be had of like, with the extended storytelling, is it better for a superhero like cinematic universe format to just be done in like, TV format and episode format as opposed to movies? Yeah. Like there's that huge question too, because I mean like Sherlock BBC, that's a TV show, but they're, movie length episodes.
Yeah.
And so like what if DC were to do something like that instead of like, trying to make it extended like movie run? I don't know. It's a lot of like, there's a lot of things to consider about it, and I think the superhero movies really exemplify the interesting time we're in that, like, you have streaming being such a big thing, and I think spearheaded by superhero movies and superheroes in general, their stories. But then you have, like, movies trying to be franchises, but that working to an extent, but not working to the extent I think everyone wants. And so it's like a really difficult, like, weird time, I think. And that's, I think, just highlighted by superhero movies because they're the ones, they're because of resources, they're able to explore all of those. So you get to kind of see trends through all the superhero movies, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, because they've also just become, like, kind of the go-to genre movie now. Where, like, superhero movies are the like, big ones that make people turn up because they have, like, that mainstream appeal in addition to, like, the niche comic nerd appeal. And so that's kind of changed the playing field, too, where, like, honestly, I think that's, like, affected the way I perceive them because, like, even when these Batman movies were coming around that I didn't watch for 12 years. When those Batman movies were coming out, when the original like Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire movies were coming out, superhero movies were this big exciting thing for me because they didn't happen all the time. Whereas now you have like 3 superhero movies to a single year, and so it's like they've become a different, I think, thing.
Go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't know.
What do you mean, like, the different thing?
Like, I guess they've become less of an event, which is I feel like it's a very, like... I don't know, like petulant thing to fixate on. Like they're not special
I
anymore.
mean, even
but,
as a casual viewer, like, I always get crap for it, but my favorite Avengers movies where everything is coming together is the first one, because that's where it feels like it's most effective.
Yeah.
Because, at a certain point, like, I think this is something to be said for Marvel, but also for DC, and especially the way DC is building compared to Marvel. It's just, as a casual viewer, it's so overwhelming. Like I said, you miss a single movie and you suddenly lose 4 plot threads. Also, having the amount of characters, it's difficult because they don't get enough time to be developed as well. So you get like 12 characters that could be really strong, but only like 3 of them are really strong and developed, and the others are kind of just there.
Yeah, well, I think it's also kind of the mindset where, like, even like in this movie, in Dark Knight Rises, like, they set everything up, they have an arc that comes to an end, and they leave things open, but that doesn't diminish from the way the arc closed. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think now with superhero movies, we've gotten so into the franchise that, like, things are never closed. We're always just kind of, each movie is a trailer for the next movie almost.
Yeah, and that's a really frustrating thing as a filmmaker, like, to watch be a huge trend, because even it's even like a trend that superhero movies have established that kind of like feeds into a lot of other different storytelling areas. Like the other day, The Hunger Games is coming back.
Yeah.
I'm like, the Hunger Games wrapped up. What are you talking about? And like it's awkward because, like, all these movies, they want to be a trailer for a franchise. But in being a trailer for a franchise, they're not enough for an audience to attach to.
Yeah.
So they never get the franchise. And it's like, guys.
Yeah, I had that moment with Alita. Because it was, I really liked...
married?
I really liked Alita, and like there were moments where they went really like they felt surprisingly faithful to this like anime manga style, and like when they really went for it, I really enjoyed the movie. But I could also tell they were like holding certain like ideas and plot elements back because they're like, oh well, we're gonna make a trilogy and we need to make sure we don't do everything in the first one, and so that was an instance where they were like doing something not as well as they could have because they wanted a trilogy, but because they didn't do it as well as they could have, they might not get to that trilogy point in the first place.
Yeah, it's like it's sad because, like, I feel like a lot of stories aren't being able to be told, and so like it's just like it's a lot. I don't know. Yeah. It's difficult because there's no short answer for everything because everything is so nuanced, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And everybody always wants to be like, oh, they're making decisions based on overseas audiences because overseas audiences, they just like different stuff than us because they're like blah, 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 blah. Like there's this like weird, like, I don't want to call it racist dialogue, but like it feels very uncomfortable in that, like, I hate when people talk about Chinese audiences related to superhero movies as if like people make bad storytelling decisions for Chinese audiences. I'm like, how about they just make bad storytelling decisions? What the fuck? Like, that's something I get really frustrated about because I feel like that's not accurate industry-wise at all.
I mean, there are things that the Chinese government affects, but there are other things that are just maybe not great decisions in general.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that every decision is because of a Chinese audience. Like, that's so weird. Like, that's such a weird thing, and in so many film circles, that's like one of the biggest criticisms. It's so weird. I don't understand. So, Dark Knight Rises is, I think, the first time in which, DC had to step up their decision making, not because I think Dark Knight Rises was a bad movie, but because people didn't receive it like I think DC wanted.
I think it was a very like pre-Marvel style superhero movie at a time when the Marvel style superhero movie was finally catching on. So I think in some ways it's kind of like, as much as this trilogy was a sign of the kind of transitional period, it's also sort of the last look we got at that age before the kind of Marvel franchise style superhero movie.
Oh yeah, 100%. And so it was kind of like DC's last light of their past.
And also like
their past. Yeah. That was really dramatic. Wow,
also,
that was.
Yeah. Also, we'll get into it later, but I think because of these movies, like, that led to DC trying to just make the Christopher Nolan Batman style, like, their uniform thing for superhero movies, whether that worked for a particular superhero or not, and that would have effects down the line.
Because I have a question for you. So, as a comic book fan, you know, I think about this a lot. Because it feels like Marvel and DC try to, like, set this, like, one style approach to every single superhero within their umbrella.
Yeah.
Do you think there's something to be said for different superheroes getting a different formatted story? Or, like, do all of them fit into the gritty model if they try? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. Because, like, that's a whole thing, too, where, like, one different superhero could have, like, 7 different interpretations that are like fit into different styles, but I also think certain characters definitely work for different styles. And actually, my net experience is Marvel movies, but like thinking of like the Marvel Netflix shows, which are very gritty and noir in tone, versus the Marvel TV series, and like these ostensibly happen in the same universe, but they're very different tonally and stylistically because certain tone and style works better for certain characters, and that's. Yeah, at Marvel, I definitely see that too, where like Guardians of the Galaxy did really well because the characters were funny and snarky, and then they started trying to make characters funny and snarky who like weren't really.
Yeah.
Because like that was one of the reasons I liked the original Thor, was that it felt very different from Iron Man. Or from
I love how
Hulk
Hamlet it is. I love how Shakespearean it is. Oh my god. Ugh.
Yeah, but that's like you wouldn't do that with Iron Man, but it makes sense with Thor.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like DC's still. I think they're almost learning that.
Because it feels like they're applying like one tone models to very different superheroes. I mean, not to say that like you said, a superhero can't have a different interpretation, but like I don't know, some of them feel less like I don't look at Aquaman and think, oh, gritty realism.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's like even going back to Arrow, like when they made that show, they basically started trying to make Green Arrow into Batman, even though Green Arrow is fundamentally different from Batman on different levels. So it's. Yeah, I think that's the thing too, is like historically Batman has been the only character that's consistently done well for DC. So they've started trying to make things very Batman centric.
I mean, ain't that the truth, honestly? Yeah, I would say even like in today's climate, Batman's a little bit. Evelyn, did you just knock the table?
Yeah.
During our episode?
We're talking about Batman, and I got very like.
Evelyn just started like stretching as if she's gonna fight. I'm just kidding. So yeah. Oh, I completely spaced my question.
Trying to make everything Batman, and Batman's the only character.
Yeah, I would argue that Batman. I remember it. Yeah, thank you. I remember. Like, I think Batman is could be argued that it's the most culturally relevant DC superhero over Superman, because I know Superman used to hold that, but any casual viewer, I think, knows about Batman a little bit more than they know about Superman.
That's a soapbox.
Get on it. Get on it.
Okay, so like I talked in our first episode about.
Sorry. I wondered what would break first.
We have come to give it back to you, the people.
Oh my god! We need to be stopped.
This is why I said I should not be on this episode.
That's so funny.
Like, I warned you.
Evelyn, this is great.
Like, so with Batman, like, in the 50s, superheroes, I think because of, like, a lot of it because it was getting out of World War II, comic books got a lot more, like, silly and out there and kind of, like, science fiction-y. Like, with Batman, there were stories about, like, Batman dressing in a rainbow costume so that nobody would notice Robin's arm was broken. Or, like,
my name's
them going to the Old West or whatever. Like, and Batman kind of became a more... And then going into the 60s Adam West show, everyone thought of Batman as this campy character. And so in the, like,
late... the shock repellent.
And which I enjoy, but, you know. And then in the late 80s, there were several authors, but, who was Alan Moore wrote Watchmen, and Frank Miller wrote The Dark Knight Returns around the same time. And they were both these attempts to make comic books really dark and gritty, and sort of bring back that kind of interpretation, and it led to this very like edgelord mindset where, like, because Watchmen was very like deconstruction-y of like, can we really have heroes? Because like if you're willing to believe in that, aren't you just like deceiving yourself? Kind of like, and they're like that cynicism has a place, but in comic books, like ever since then, there's been this audience that's become very cynical, and like if your hero isn't very cynical, they almost don't want to believe in it, like because of that. And like that was even before 9/11, that was a thing, and I think now that's come even more to a head. And Superman as a very innately optimistic character whose like entire purpose is to be this emblem of like hope and like what a really good person should be and everything. Like I think a lot of people choose to believe it, like choose to focus on Batman more because they see him as this, as being compatible with that like sort of pseudo nihilist outlook versus like the more optimistic outlook that Superman represents. Which as a Superman fan kind of chafes my bacon, but you know, that's
talk more about that.
Superman's
no,
really
not good. Superman. Talk to me about the phrase "chafe my bacon." I'm just kidding.
You know, I was talking about 50s comics and I just degenerated into 50s slang.
You're like, I swear to God, let's go down to the soda shop.
Great Caesar's ghost.
Oh my God, yeah. And yeah, continue. Go for it. I like this. This is very interesting.
Like,
because we're about to get into Superman and all them boys.
But yeah, I think, and like, because we don't have an episode about Man of Steel, but
no, we don't. Because this is my podcast.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Man of
saying,
Steel's
like,
okay.
I can talk about it now because I don't have to save that for
now. 100%. Go for it.
I think Man of Steel came out around this time, and it was a pretty egregious example of them being like, the Nolan Batman films were gritty and grounded, so we're going to make this Superman film gritty and grounded, even though that doesn't work for Superman nearly as well as it works for Batman. And I think Man of Steel, I think, worked because it did ultimately understand this idea that like Superman needs to be this emblem of goodness, that maybe it's attainable and maybe it isn't, but we still need to be able to strive for it regardless. And they even had like Russell Crowe giving that monologue about something along those lines. And so I think Man of Steel got that, but they did try to insert this kind of like gritty cynicism into the Superman character that's kind of almost antithetical to the whole point of a Superman story.
Yeah.
With like, who played his dad?
Okay, Google. Who played Superman's dad in Man of Steel?
Waterworld.
Jor-El was played by Russell Crowe.
Okay, not his other dad. Okay, Google. Who played Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel?
Jonathan Kent was played by Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner.
I thought you were going to say, no, who played his other dad?
Honestly, there's like a 30-60% chance that would work. But yeah, Kevin Costner. With his, like, a lot of people have criticized Kevin Costner's character as Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel as being this character who imposes that kind of cynicism where he's like, you can't, like, you have to let me die because if people see you being Superman, life will be harder, and like trying to like, and we get into that in these later DCU movies, but like sort of trying to put Superman in a place that Superman doesn't make sense, I guess. And trying to put, like, I think Man of Steel worked because ultimately it put him through these decisions that were really hard, and he still emerged as a good and optimistic character, but it also tried to kind of like insert this cynicism that underplayed that, where it's like, yeah, he's good and optimistic, but the world is crap and it'll always be crap no matter how optimistic you are. So like, yeah, that's a whole philosophical thing, but like, yeah, I think that's why.
Well, it's a good thing that next episode we're talking Granny's sweet tea.
But yeah, I think that's why a lot of people, like, especially like, I'm trying to not talk bad about large general audiences because, like, don't people are smart.
Don't do that, Evelyn.
But like, I think there are a lot of people who, like, especially younger people who jump onto Batman because they just see that like gritty cynicism, and they're like, yeah, because that's right, because the world is bad, and you can't get ahead by being a Boy Scout. You need to be edgy and bad. And like
yeah,
they
it is
impose
definitely
that
like
onto Batman.
I did notice, as somebody who was super into the Batman movies in middle school, and I mean now I still like a lot of there is a very clear like there is a strong distinct difference between, and I don't want to like, I'm not trying to speak generally, but I've noticed a difference between fans of the comic book versus fans of just the movies.
Yeah.
There seems to be a less nuanced opinion with fans of just the movie as opposed to the comic book. Because, I mean, I just see Batman as super gritty. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily perceive him in the same Adam West kind of
like,
vein. But then again, I've only had experience with...
Also, don't, like... I don't know. The Dark Knight Returns is, I guess, a good comic book, but there's so much text. Like... It's like a novel with tiny pictures that like take up like an inch or two because there's so much text.
Wow. I read The Long Halloween and I think The Killing Joke.
Okay, yeah.
I think I've read both of those. Those are
yeah, and those were kind of like part of that like post gritty Batman era for sure.
The Long Halloween was shit. Yeah, it was super that though.
Yeah.
I just like the idea that Gotham is just dark at all hours of the day.
Yeah. Well, I like in one of the most recent Lego games, you can go from Metropolis to Gotham whenever you want, and like Gotham is always dark and Metropolis is always daytime.
That's hilarious. That cracks me up.
But I think thematically that was like a whole point, because I want to say like the term Gotham was like a slang term for New York.
Yeah, no, it totally is.
And like Gotham represented New York during the nighttime, and Metropolis represented New York during the daytime, like metaphorically.
Wow.
But yeah,
Wow.
Also, I was talking about darkness and grittiness. So really, this all boils down to the fact that DC thought that the darkness was their ally, but they merely adopted the darkness.
I didn't see the light until I was a man. By then, it was nothing but blighting. Oh my god. I love that. I love Tom Hardy's Bane so much, bitch. And unironically, I just need to emphasize that. I unironically love Tom Hardy's Bane.
Yeah, he was a good character once. Like
he was such a good character. I really like it, the twist where like he's not like this mastermind of everything, and he's kind of just following this woman's orders. I love that. But what? Sorry, continue.
Yeah, after the first 20 minutes of the movie, you kind of get like desensitized to Bane's voice, so it's not you're not like giggling the whole time.
Yeah, and honestly, I want to make the argument that it's a practical decision. They were like, his mouth is covered. What else is
it's not the mouth cover. It's the actual voice he's doing, where he's talking like middle American.
It's a little transatlantic.
Yeah, I want to they said something about South Africa. Like, is that supposed to be South African? Like.
Oh my god.
Maybe?
Is it?
I don't know.
Why are you running? Why are you running? Bane be like...
When are we going to get those Hollywood superhero movies?
I would die. Oh, that would be so good. Okay. But yeah, so do you have any other thoughts about The Dark Knight Rises? I almost did the chant again.
Yeah.
I'm glad I stopped myself. I'm so glad I stopped myself.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely was. I felt like it was a good ending to this trilogy because it finally puts Bruce Man.
Did you just call him Bruce Man? It took me a second. That's so good.
I'm just gonna call him that now.
That's Batman's new name.
Bruce Wayne. It gets him to a place that the whole conflict since the very first movie has been I can never give up. I can never put this crusade away because the world still needs me to be whatever. And we get him organically to that place where he accepts he's gotten the world to a place where they don't need him, but also he accepts that he's found a way to balance the Bruce Wayne and the Batman in himself, if that makes sense. He leaves on that. That's a weird way of saying that.
I'm so kind of fun. I'm so giggling about Bruce Man.
Yeah, I'm gonna call him that all the next episode.
So sorry. I don't know why that up.
Yeah, no.
Bruce, man.
But yeah, like getting him and Selena Kyle to that place where they're able to like.
Tap out. I'm so sorry.
Honestly, I don't blame you even.
Just imagine meeting Christian Bale. Oh fuck! I loved your portrayal of Bruce, man. Okay, I'm sorry. We can move on. Move on to your actual intellectual.
Yeah, I don't even know if I could do it now. Yeah, I think Selena Kyle was a big component of getting him to that place where he's able to like accept the duality of who he is and move on like from that, because she's someone who's only existed in the sort of shadowy world, and he's someone who's tried to exist in both, and like they kind of like balance each other out, I think. So having them like be together at the end kind of it bookends things in a nice way where it doesn't like you feel like these characters are going to keep going on, but the conflict is resolved in a nice way.
Yeah, I really love the cute ending with Alfred, how it's what he imagined.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I cry every time. Like this if you cried.
Siri ever Tim. But yeah, also and like resolving his relationship with Alfred and bringing in Joseph Gordon-Levitt as like this new character so you get the idea that this like things are going to continue and there's always going to be a protector, but that's not going to be at a cost to Bruce Wayne anymore. And then Joseph Gordon-Levitt ends up in Inception. I don't know how that carries over, but somehow. What if Inception was just in the like Batman universe?
I wish. Somewhere the top. Did it stop? Is it still spinning? God. Dreidel.
Cillian Murphy was in that too. Yeah.
I love Cillian Murphy, bitch. Oh my god, I'm obsessed. Death or Exile? Death by Exile.
Yeah.
That was my favorite thing in middle school. I think that was my bio and like everything.
But yeah, I think again, being someone, I think it's almost better that I didn't see these movies when they came out, because kind of going back to them like after having gone through this whole Marvel Infinity War thing, like it was kind of neat to remember what these movies used to be like, and how even though they weren't as focused on replicating the details and the like specifics of comic books, that they still captured the spirit of them almost better than some of the films do today, which was interesting to realize. Which
is what I completely agree with, and why I think it's like shitty that it gets shitted on so much. I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, yeah, I think it's another like, and as a comic fan, I understand this. We're comic fans. If it's not exactly like it was in the comic books, people get very angry, and like to some degree, I get that you want there to be respect and understanding of the source material, but also like if you're making a new story, you need to be able to tell a new story. And I think like, because even in the comics, they've done like Elseworlds or like Ultimate Marvel, where they're like, yeah, this is the same world, but everything's different and nothing works the same. Mm-hmm. And like, I think you need to be able to do that, because I don't think you can just replicate the comics, but also like if you do, then it like there's on some level there's not any point to having made a film about it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah. Excellent. Well, Evelyn.
Yeah.
It looks like it's all over this episode. Max, it's slipping.
Yeah, because you have to cover your face. If you don't cover your face, it's not.
Bye, everyone. You can follow us at Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.
Should I just change my Twitter handle to Bruce Man?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Bruce Man. Oh my god, that's so good. That needs to be a t-shirt. It's a t-shirt with Christian Bale and it says Bruce Man. We should go change the Wikipedia page. Fans out there, anyone?
Yeah.
Does anyone know how to treat
Well,
a
you
Wikipedia
see,
page?
because Bruce Wayne is the mask that Batman wears.
Yeah.
So really, Bruce Man is the.
Bruce Man is the real.
Yeah. I don't know.
Bye.